Okay, hey you guys. Thank you so much for joining me here tonight. My name is Darien G, and I'm super excited to be here and to see everyone who took time out of their schedule to be here. So thank you. Um, as Andrea said, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. I'll do my best to answer as many of them as I can before we're done this evening. I'm beaming in from the Big Island of Hawaii, so we have a few more hours of daylight here. So hopefully if you guys are on the East Coast, I will send some sun rays your way. I'm super excited tonight to talk to you about writing micronarratives, what they are and how you can use them in whatever writing project or practice you might have going on. It's not just for memoir poetry. A lot of novelists that we're seeing these days are building their books on fragments and vignettes. And there's more and more collections of flash or micro work that's getting put out there. So there's just so many ways that you can use it. And it's just a great way, especially if you find yourself ever stuck in any project that you're working on, to sort of find another way in. I'll be reading 3 short excerpts from my work, all micro. I've got 2 books that are out this fall, a small collection of poems that Patricia Smith selected for a Poetry Society of America Chapbook Fellowship, and a collection of personal essays and micro memoirs about family, growing up Chinese American, and where we put our allegiances. So to give you some background, my literary career is a bit unusual because I'm actually a novelist. I have 5 novels with Penguin Random House, and I also have a nonfiction craft book on writing memoir. And then now I have a book of essays as well as the poetry. So I've been lucky enough to see a lot of different things so far in my literary career. I've actually done it all. I've done the traditional publishing, I've done the hybrid publishing, self-publishing, indie publishing, so I can speak to that if there are questions about that. I also am really, I love talking about what you can do to get your work out in the world if that's something that you're thinking about, or possibly submitting smaller pieces to literary journals or magazines, which is something that you'll be able to do even with possibly something that you generate from this workshop tonight. I love talking about process. I love talking about writing. I love figuring out if you're stuck, how to get you unstuck. So anything that has to do with process, that's totally on the table as well. I got my MFA at 50, so I did spend the first chunk of my career just trying to figure out how to make it all work. And really, it was the fact that I was a reader that got me that launched my career and got me where I wanted to go. I already had several books out actually by the time I decided to go back and get my MFA, and that gave me a chance to pivot into something new. So that was pretty exciting for me. So in terms of genre or what I write, as I said, I've done commercial fiction, nonfiction, creative nonfiction, literary prose, and poetry. So anything you've got in those areas, I'm your person if you've got questions. Okay, so both of my books share similar themes. They look at issues of family and identity and otherness. But for me, despite these similarities, they've actually emerged from 2 different spaces, and for 2 different reasons. So Other Small Histories follows my matrilineal line from my unnamed great-grandmother down to me. And I wrote these poems because these histories were overlooked, and I wanted to bear witness to these women and their sacrifices. In many cases, these stories ended in tragedy, and that tragedy is the only memory that exists in our family. And I just wanted more for these women. I wanted to have a history in our family legacy. My book of essays, micro essays, Allegiance, is about how we find our tribes and where we put our loyalties. It's about the families we're born into or the families we choose to make on our own. In both cases, I actually use what I'm calling a micro narrative form. You might have heard about it. Some people hear about Flash, which is a larger form. It's usually somewhere between 750 to 1,000 words. I'm defining micro narrative as lyric prose that's about 250 to 300 words max or less. So I think some of the mentees here have done the 6-word memoir or the 100-word story. It's the same kind of idea, right? You're putting a container of time or word count around your piece and really trying to adhere to that, and then making your writing work so that or not work, but I guess it's sort of like a ceramicist or a potter sort of molding it to just be the right kind of container. Because of its brevity and lyric nature, micro-narrative forms tend to blur the line between prose and poetry. And I'm going to loosely sort of define poetry here as language that has like maybe specific beats. We're more commonly used to seeing it as prose that has specific line breaks. You know, the way the treatment of the text on the page is very intentional to the intention of the writer or the poet in terms of how they want the work received. Prose is, in my case, you'll just see their paragraph forms, their full sentences. They may or may not be missing a verb. My basic rule, as far as rules go about writing, my basic rule is as long as it works. So if it's something that rolls off the tongue and it works, you're good. So I don't do this whole thing. I don't count. I don't do anything other than just, I love to read work aloud. I encourage you, if you don't have a habit of reading your work out loud, and it doesn't matter if it's a novel or a poem or a short story, it makes a huge difference. I've read my novels all out loud multiple times in order to hear where I might have messed up with dialogue, or where a sentence isn't quite working, or where I even get tired myself or fatigued with the text. So anyways, that's something that I really recommend. So anyway, we're going to be looking at distilled text today. And our real focus here is going to be illuminating an emotional truth in a succinct and evocative way. So I'm going to give you an example. The first micro essay I'm going to read is from my book, Allegiance. And this one clocks in at 177 words. And we'll go ahead and put it up on the screen so you can see it and read along with me if you'd like. At the American Chamber of Commerce dinner in Beijing, 1995. We wait for our dinner at linen draped tables. Side by side, we smile at one another. The woman could be from Iowa or Colorado or Montana or California. Her name might be Evelyn or Florence or Charlotte or Carol. We are in China, a country of 1 billion Chinese faces. She says, I have lived here for 6 years. I feel almost local. She sees these faces every day. Chinese people walking along dusty sidewalks, Chinese people working in her home, Chinese people driving her from point A to point B. It took a long time to learn their names. She laughs, it's too easy to mix them up. She gives them American names or truncates their Chinese ones, Johnny, Xiaohu, or calls them by their job titles, Siji for driver, Ai for maid. Her husband works for Shell Oil Company. I am young, 26, Chinese American, born in St. Louis, raised on Wonder Bread and Hershey's. But still, the woman says, she pats me on the arm, leans in close. Your English is so good. So I'm going to thank you for that slide, Andrea. I'm going to read a second piece, and this piece only has 170 words. And we'll talk a little bit about triggers and other things in a second, but this was inspired from a photograph. So it starts with photograph, poolside selfie at the Four Seasons Hualalai. And I just have to mention here, it's not the Four Seasons, total landscaping. So the four of us seated in a row, my brother, me, my sister-in-law, my husband. My sister-in-law is pregnant, and my husband holds our 5-month-old daughter in his lap, a portrait of 2 families in the making. Our bodies angled toward the camera as if this promised land will stop time from moving forward. The frame of towering palm trees and perfect blue skies evidence a holiday from life, not life itself. My brother and his wife will divorce within a year. A decade later, he and I will no longer speak. Other bodies will assume the position in these chairs. Other bodies will believe this paradise. So as I mentioned, this last piece that I just read was triggered by an image, even though I don't include the image in my book. And I just wanted to share that with you. And I did get permission from my brother, who I'm actually talking with now, that that actually is something that happened. We've been estranged for 10 plus years, almost 20 years, and we just reconnected about 3 weeks ago before this book came out. And my ex-sister-in-law, they gave me permission to use their image here. But I just want to share it with you because it's not really about, is this a great picture and what's in this picture? It's about what you notice in this picture. And so if you're new to writing, or if you do a lot of free writes, a prompt, like using a prompt like an image or an object, a piece of jewelry, a stone. I have this amethyst on my desk that has some history to it. Clothing, food, even a smell, any of these things can drop you into a story. Once you are in the story, then it's sort of your business to figure out, okay, what wants my attention? What's happening here? What's going on for me inside with this? So, and other times you'll just land on it right away. So you'll just be like, I know exactly where I'm going with this. So this is the one thing that I love many things about micro, but this is the one thing that's super cool about micro, which is that your brain is an organizing master. So if you sort of set this frame and you tell your brain, I need to do this in 250 to 300 words or less, then you'll be amazed at how your brain's like, okay, well, I guess that's what we're doing. And it'll start to help you with your prose in terms of accommodating that. So for my poetry chapbook, Other Small Histories, I wanted to write about the women in my matrilineal line. And it wasn't just my unnamed great grandmother and grandparents, my mother and myself, but it was actually my grandfather had 3 wives. And so I wrote these poems because I just really felt like there was more to this story than sort of the drama that you hear about, like, what's going on with that? Why were there 3 wives? And this must have been a good thing or a bad thing. And so I really wanted to create a history for some of these women who had no history at all. And actually, about 3 of these women in my family lineage, even if we're not associated or related by blood, don't even have names or date of births or even times of death or dates of death or anything like that. So I did have to take some creative liberties, and I had to imagine who these women were and who they were to me. One of the things I'd received feedback on was why it felt so important for me to write about women who weren't actually related to me by blood. And all I can say is that they are part of my story and they're part of my, I guess, my blood lineage from that perspective, but I don't see them as anything other than family. And I don't necessarily mean that in a warm, fuzzy way. I just mean that in a way that we have this connection, and I'm really interested in trying to figure out what that is. So the story that I'm about to read you is like actually many of the stories in my family line, which ends with loss and unknowing. And it's going to be, the piece I'm reading is called Totem. It's about my grandfather's first wife. And that was an arranged village marriage. And nobody, including my grandfather, he had returned to university the day after his wedding ceremony, which he didn't even know about until he showed up in the village to visit his family. But he was there long enough, I think like 24, 48 hours. It was very, very brief. Slept with a new wife. She actually got pregnant, and he never returned to the village. So he didn't know whatever happened to her or the baby girl that she gave birth to, who, as the story goes, had passed away. And so that has always kind of affected me. And I wanted to spend time with that. So this is Totem. Here are the items she brings to her husband's home: clothes, a silver comb, a pair of ivory chopsticks, a small ring set with an orb of carved jade. Not for the family, her mother whispers, to keep for you, just in case. Her father has disappeared without a goodbye. Maybe he went to the tea house or for a walk along the river, skipping the flat, smooth stones across the water. Maybe he is haggling for 5 more jean of coal briquettes for the winter. Already, she's becoming a faint memory. Her husband-to-be is an intellectual from a good enough family. Later, alone in that strange bed, she will pull the ring from her underclothes and slip it onto her finger, raise it to her lips. She searches for home with each probe of the tongue. She will wonder if she can swallow it whole. So that piece was 145 words. And the prose poems in my chapbook range from about 115 words to 300 words. So that, in a nutshell, is at least how I work and define micro memoirs, and the different ways they can look, and sort of the passage of both time and emotional arc that I tried to capture in those few sentences. I'm going to be giving you some prompts, but I wanted to see first if there were any questions about micro memoirs or using it in anything that you might be working on right now.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, please.
So can you write it as a poem too, or?
Yes, you can absolutely write it as a poem too. And it's so funny because I feel like you must have looked at what I was going to do today. Actually, so the chapbook that is actually the one that I just read, Totem, is actually considered a prose poem. And so that's actually in a collection of poetry. And they all look like they're all prose poems. And one thing that I did was I actually have a process, which is what I'm sharing with you today, about how I develop these narratives and poems and how I work to them. And what I do is these all started as poems with line breaks and me trying to figure out what my beats were and what I wanted to emphasize and what I wanted to have happen. And I won't get too far ahead of myself, but what we'll do with the prompt is if you're somebody who's more of a prose writer, you can go ahead and do this prompt as a prose exercise. If you are a poet, or you may not even consider yourself to be a poet, you may just feel like what I want to write feels like it would do well coming out in that kind of a form, go for it. It's like, don't worry about where you put your line breaks or how you think it's going to end up on the page. Just go with what you are feeling interested in pursuing. So, long answer to your question, yes, you can definitely make them into poems, and we'll do that next. Was there anything else with that question that you wanted to ask me?
I don't have anything else.
Okay. Does anybody else have a question, or we can go right into the prompt? All right, well, let's go into the prompt. And what we'll do is as with all prompts, you just want to go ahead and follow where it leads. Don't worry if you stray or go down a rabbit hole or end up like you started writing about a car trip, and the next thing you know, you're like on an island somewhere. Don't even worry about it. You just follow it, just trust it. As you can tell, for these two books, I've been writing about family, both known and unknown. For this next prompt, I want you to write about somebody in your lineage. It could be by blood or by choice or by inspiration. Like if there's somebody who creatively you really connect to, and you feel like she's somebody she's the reason why I write. And I use her life and her example as a testament to my own and my own ability. However you want to do that, go for it. You can explore your connections with this person. All of the excerpts that I read share one thing in common, and that's emotional truth. So that's what we're going to go for here. So a small revealing of yourself or somebody in your life. Okay. So what I want you to do is I want you to think, what is the first line of a poem or essay about your family history or artistic lineage? All right. So what would be the first line of a poem or essay about your family history or artistic lineage? And once you have your first line, I want you to just keep going, either as a poem or as a piece of prose, and just kind of tell yourself in the back of your mind, I have a max word count of 300. If you end up with 25 words, that's fine. But just tell yourself that that's the container you're working with. And then when you feel done, title the piece. And if you'd like, you can drop it in the chat, and we'll write for about 10 minutes.
We were walking hand in hand on a white sandy beach of Hawaii. We were playing in the sun. We were having so much fun on a white sandy beach of Hawaii. The sound of the ocean soothes my restless soul. The sound of the ocean rocks me all night long. Those hot, long summer days, lying there in the sun, on a white sandy beach of Hawaii. The sound of the ocean soothes my restless soul. The sound of the ocean rocks me all night long. Last night in my dream, I saw your face again. We were there in the sun.
Okay, I just thank you guys for sharing so honestly and openly. And these pieces were just like stunningly awesome and gorgeous. And it's like, look what you can do in 10 minutes, right? So this next prompt is going to piggyback off this first prompt. And if, like I said, you're just joining us or you weren't really sure with the first round if you're going to jump in or not, this is an opportunity for you to try again. So get your pen and paper ready. Um, if you wrote a poem in the last exercise, I want you to take a few minutes to revise it into an essay. So even if you're a poet and all you do is poetry, for the sake of this exercise, and just consider this as part of sort of the revision process and another way to look at your own words differently, take the poem into a prose form. Try to make it into an essay, a small micro essay. If you wrote a micro essay or more prosy type narrative in the last exercise, I want you to actually try to revise it into a poem or whatever your definition of a poem might be. So maybe you're going to add in certain kinds of line breaks. Maybe you're going to add in a little bit more white space. If you're writing by hand, of course, or just typing in a notepad, then just do whatever works best for you. But that would be your assignment for the next 10 minutes, about, 9 or 10 minutes, which is to do a revision of that first piece, but in a different form. And then if you're just joining us, you can go ahead and do the first prompt, which is to, let me go back and find it, which is what would be the first line. Actually, I guess we can go ahead and drop it into the, thank you, Rochelle. So it's in the chat. It's what would be the first line of a poem or essay about your family history or artistic lineage, and then just go from there. So you can go, if you're writing for the first time, just go right into either a poem or a piece of prose. If you've already written, even if you feel like it's raw, you don't know what it is, try to put it in another form. And we'll do this for about 9 or 10 minutes.
A long, long time ago, there was a volcano living all alone in the middle of the sea. He sat high above his bed, watching all the couples play, and wishing that he had someone too. And from his lover came this song of hope that he sang out loud every day for years and years. I have a dream I hope will come true. You're here with me and I'm here with you. I wish that the earth see the sky up above will send me someone to love. Years of singing all alone turned his lava into stone until he was on the brink of extinction. But little did he know that living in the sea below, another volcano was listening to his song. Every day she heard his tune, her lava grew and grew because she believed his song was meant for her. Now she was so ready to meet him above the sea as he sang his song of hope for the last time. I have a dream I hope will come true, that you're here with me and I'm here with you. I wish that the earth see the sky up above will send me someone to love. Rising from the sea below stood a lovely volcano, looking all around, but she could not see him. He tried to sing to let her know that she was not there alone, but with no lava his song was all gone. He filled the sea with his tears and watched his dreams disappear as she remembered what his song meant to her.
I have a dream I hope will come true, that you're here with me and I'm here with you. I wish that the earth, sea, and the sky up above will send me someone to love on.
Oh, they were so happy to finally meet above the sea. All together now their lava grew and grew. No longer are they all alone, with Aloha as their new home. And when we visit them, this is what they sing. I have a dream I hope will come true,
that you'll grow old with me
and I'll grow old with you. We thank the earth, steer the sky, we thank too. I love you. I love you. I love you. kaya kembali
Okay, so we've got a few minutes left. I know that there's so many good writing that still we're leaving in the chat, and so I'll try to come back to that. But I do want to leave some time for Q&A, and then I do want to make sure that I send you guys off with the final prompt, which will put all of this hard work, I hope, into perspective. So why don't we take like the next 5 or 7 minutes because we're kind of running out, and I do want us to end on time, so because I know everyone has places to go. Are there any questions that, and if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat so we can take a look, or you can just raise your hand and ask them. And it can be about either the process, it could be about writing in general, any of the 8 million things we touched on briefly. I'm seeing one in the chat. I'm going to answer first, and then I think I see Lisa's hand up. So can you describe your publishing journey? So I will try to do that in a couple minutes. Usually I take an hour just going and telling you everything about my whole journey. So in a nutshell, I feel like I've always been a writer, right? Like I told stories when I was younger. I used to write like little plays, like from 4th grade on. You know, my parents had an old typewriter that was not electric, so I was sort of always picking away at my stories. But maybe because I'm Asian, and there's always this thing about work ethic and jobs and paying for your house and things like that, I kind of felt like I didn't know anybody who was a writer, and I didn't know that you could actually maybe make money from I just didn't know anybody who could make that a career. So I went into sort of business and a corporate kind of life, and I always wrote stories on the side, but it wasn't until I was in my 30s where I was like, I think I can write a novel, and I want to try. And so I tried, and it's there's a longer story there, but basically it took me 10 years to get out of my own way, because I even had an agent for one of the books, and I sort of self-sabotaged that. But I finally went for it, and I was around 32. And one thing that I guess if I leave you with anything with this, is that my life at that time was really chaotic, and we were really, really, really broke, and it was really a hard time. And ironically, that was a thing that got me out of my own way, because I was so busy that I couldn't talk myself out of doing this thing that was super scary. And I don't, recommend writing under stress on a regular basis, but I just feel like if you've got a really super full life right now and tons of demands, and you're like, I don't know how I can do this. I don't think I can do this. Try to carve out your room, but also trust just like what's happening in that moment. Because I took a whole year off at one point to write the novel, and all I did was burn through my savings and get in my own way and create a lot of anxiety for myself. And sometimes as writers, we are just really good at, judging our work and just messing with it. And when we were so overwhelmed, when I decided to write my first novel, I was just like, I'm just going to do it. I think I can do it. I'm just going to do it. And I did everything I could to make it good. And then I sent it out. And I did go through a regular query process, which is what you do with fiction and like memoir, to find an agent. And that took a while, but I did get an agent. The agent eventually found me a publisher. And that was sort of how my career started. So I did start in traditional publishing with what they call a big 5, big 6 publisher, Penguin Random House. And then I actually had a book that did really well, and it sold in multiple countries, and I got paid a good advance after having been paid almost nothing for my books, but I didn't care. I was just so excited to be published. And then it was kind of a bummer because it didn't do well. And so my agents were like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't think it's going to happen. And this has happened several times in my career where I was told it was over, and I got depressed, and then I decided to pivot and make something else happen. And so that's kind of where it's been for me, where and I think that's one reason why I sort of ended up doing these new forms too. Like people say, are you a poet now, or are you an essayist now? And I'm like, no, I'm just a writer. And I think as a writer, we get to write, and we get to do whatever you feel like in that moment is the right kind of writing for you, which is one reason why I love this process that I'm sharing with you today, which, asks you a little bit to maybe shake up your definition of what form is, and what kind of writer you are, right? And I really do look at myself as a storyteller, both of fictional stories as well as non-fictional stories. So, and then I just do a lot of different things. I have, like I said, I've worked with small publishers and large publishers. So I have a little bit of all of that. Overcoming writer's block. Okay, so you're either going to love or hate what I'm about to say. So I am actually not a believer in writer's block. I am, however, a believer in not being able to get something done and not being able to finish a project and talking yourself out of projects and self-sabotage and all this stuff. Writer's block, the way we've traditionally defined it, at least, is that you don't know what to write or you don't know what to do. I look at it more as like you just don't know what to do. And actually, I think it's actually you do know what to do. You either just haven't figured it out yet, like it hasn't presented itself to you, or you kind of know it and you just don't want to do it. That's actually the kind of writer's block I have, where I'm like, oh, I know I need to redo that scene, and I just don't want to redo that scene because it's painful and it's hard, and I don't want to put all this emotional energy into fixing it and then have it not work. So I'd rather just not do it and talk about it and clean out my drawers, right? So for me, I feel like if you're having problems with your story or your poem or your essay or whatever it is that you're working on, that for me is a signal that you need to find another way in. So in other words, it's not that the project isn't any good or that you're not any good as a writer. It means that you just haven't found the right way into the story at this point in time that's going to keep you writing. So you can do things like this thing that we're talking about, where you're flipping forms, where you maybe, or you're having a conversation with a character, like all these things that you hear, some of them actually work. And the whole point is not that, okay, you're going to include that in your book, but that you're going to stop thinking or approaching a problem or the story in a way that you might have in the past. And then, which means that you're also going to be applying the same rules to that, the same structure to that. And you've already proven that's not working because you're stuck. So say, okay, well, none of that has worked. So forget that. How else can I come in from this way? Can I come in from this way? How else can I do this, right? So that's sort of my thing on writer's block, is to be kind to yourself, but also tell yourself, I know how to fix this problem. I just don't know yet, but I know it's in there somewhere, and it's just my job to figure out how to like unlock that. So kind of look at it as a creative problem. There's a great question here about submitting micro prose stories. We're actually going to talk about that a little bit in the end, but that is, I'm going to jump ahead here actually. That is one reason why I like working with this form. And again, it could be prose poems, or it could be something that looks like a more traditional essay. If you look at my work, they have all been published. They all look about the same, and they've been published as poetry, prose poetry, creative nonfiction, micro essays, and micro narratives. You can actually see them in different literary journals where they have these separate headings, and they're the same kind of work, right? So what's cool about this is that you can send out these pieces into the world, and they will and place them pretty quickly. And then if you wanted to, you can put them all together in a collection. In some cases, you see people who launch into their novel or their books that way. Submittable has a place where they're always asking for flash or micro work. And we'll just jump ahead a little bit, Rochelle, because I know we're kind of getting tight on time. A friend of mine is collaborating with someone named Grant Faulkner, who's the founder of the 100-Word Story. And she's putting together an anthology called Small Bright Things, and looking for teen and young writers to submit their work. So if you wrote something that you like even today, like it'd be so awesome if it was something that you did today that we generated here, you can submit it to her, and there's no submission fee. And then she's gonna, make some decisions, I guess, in February about what would go in. And so we'll put that link in the chat, and you can definitely submit your work there. I also have a flash workbook that I created for a workshop that I did one time, and we'll drop that link. It's a PDF, and we'll drop that link in there. And that's, again, it's just a generative thing. It's more flash, which is about like 750 words to 1,000 words, not as micro as we're talking, but it's like 30 prompts. So at least for the next 30 days, you can keep busy, and it'll give you a chance again to play with different ideas and different stories. I mean, I think the key here is to always be writing, especially if you're feeling stuck. So this is one way to make sure that happens. And I think, is there anything else I wanted to say before we wrap up? I'm sorry I didn't get to all of your awesome questions, but let me see if there's anything else. I guess that's pretty much it for me. I'm going to give you a takeaway prompt if you want to throw that up. And this is the third prompt, it's not homework. You do not have to do it, but if you want to do it, it'll be here for you. So the final step in this is to take the second piece and revise it back into the current form. Now, you're not going to look at the first thing that you wrote. You're not going to look at that and revise that. You're going to take the second piece that you wrote. If it was a poem, you're going to put it back into a prose form. If it was a prose piece, you're going to put it back into a poetic form. You're not going to refer back to that first piece. You're just going to let that piece stay parked over here. Okay. And then, so just move it back into that form. Then when you're done, you can compare all three versions and see which one you like best. I really recommend, if you haven't already, and you guys know who I'm talking about when I say this, if you haven't titled your work, even if it's rough, I'm a big believer in titles and working titles. So if you haven't titled your work, please just drop a title in there, even if you have in parentheses working title, which is your cue that it may change. And if all three pieces have different titles, that's great. If they're, you know, even if they're all similar, don't worry about it. But go ahead and do that. So anyways, thank you guys so much. I feel so honored to be a part of this mission of celebrating and uplifting voices of young women writers of color in the creative arts. And I really can't think of a more necessary and important mission at this time in our history as a country. So we need these perspectives. We need your perspectives. We need your stories, because I consider you our future decision makers and leaders. So thank you. I'm so honored to be part of this mission.